Well, we're starting a new series called Intersections. Normally, when we think of intersections, we think about cars that have to cross paths. And when they cross paths, there's an intersection. And how do you navigate crossing paths? And there's always some decision that has to be made. You know, oftentimes there's a light, there's a four-way stop, and you have to make decisions about what you're going to do. Like, don't go on red and, or stop on green, that sort of thing. But when we talk about this with this series, what we're talking about are people, because there's people in those cars. We're talking about what happens when people cross paths with other people. And specifically with this series, we're talking about what happens when people cross paths with Jesus. What are these encounters? What are these intersections that Jesus has with people? So we're going to spend the next 3 weeks and we're going to look at these intersections that Jesus has. And there's always decisions to be made, always things to figure out. And the thing I want to drive toward today, we're going to talk a little bit about fishing today. And one of the things I want to drive toward today is that there is an aspect of our lives where, in a way, we're to be fishermen. We're to be fishermen of men, and that is one of these wonderful callings that we have in being followers of Christ. To do this, we're going to look at two passages. The first one is found in Mark chapter 1. So if you have your Bibles, flip to Mark chapter 1. There's this great story, this intersection that Jesus has with a couple of guys, but I love the way it gets set up. It's early in the morning. We learn that in another place in the text, but it's probably very, very early in the morning. Look with me in Mark chapter 1. Let me find it. Verse 16. Look at verse 16. Mark chapter 1, verse 16. It says this. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee. Just stop there for a second. So you got to picture this. Here's Jesus early in the morning. He's probably has his cup of coffee. I don't know that for sure, but I'm just assuming because he was a godly man, so he must have had some coffee there with him. Walking on the beach, on the Sea of Galilee. And he's probably took his sandals off and he's walking on the beach and he can feel the sand, squishing up between his toes a little bit. And it's just more proof to me that Jesus was an outdoorsman, right? He was an outdoorsman. And there's that whole thing with the sea. Don't you just love the sound of waves as they roll up on the beach? How many of you love walking on the beach? Yeah, I love that. You know what it reminds me of? Surfing, yeah, surfing, that's great. And I was thinking about that this week. I think that was the heart of Jesus too, because remember that story where there's the storm, and there must have been waves in that storm, and what is Jesus doing? He's out on the waves. I think it's the first recorded moment in human history where someone barefoot surfs. I think that's what's going on there. And then Peter, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's there. It's there. He and Peter, the only ones to ever do it. There's people that barefoot water ski, barefoot or body surf, but first one to barefoot surf. Anyhow, I'm chasing a rabbit. We'll get back to the text here. So here's Jesus. And there's this moment that he's walking on the beach early in the morning, and he looks out over the Sea of Galilee, and the text tells us that he sees two people. He sees Simon and Andrew, and Simon and Andrew are fishermen, and they're out there in the early morning hours, and they're fishing. And you've just got to picture Jesus in this moment as he's watching them I was going to say surf. As they're watching them, Freudian slip. He's watching them fish out there on the Sea of Galilee. And you realize Jesus, he knows them. He's their creator. This is God. We see him in a historical context here. But he is also the creator of the universe. He knows these men. And I would imagine he's sitting there, and the text tells us he sees them and he watches them. And he sees how good they are at this whole surfing. Just got this on my brain. At this whole fishing thing, okay? And, in this day and age, probably they made their own nets. And he's thinking about this. These men, they make their own nets. And they know what size, holes to put in the nets. And they know what time of the day is best to catch the fish. And they know when the water's cold, you've got to go into deep water or shallow water. And they know, what the moon is doing and the currents and the waves. And they know how to get in a boat and sail out in this sea and to fish that you can't even see below the water. But he also knows that they're created for, as magnificent as that is, they're created for something even better. that there's more that God has in store for them. And so then the text goes on. Look with me back at the text here, verse 16. It says, as Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Because that's what they do. And he just picture him watching them do this. And then we don't know how much longer. Maybe it was soon after that they pulled their boat in with their catch. Maybe it was hours later. We're not sure. But then it goes on. It says he addresses them. There's this conversation, verse 17. He says to them, come, follow me. And of course, there's this great invitation that Jesus gives. And so much of the New Testament is all about this tremendous invitation to do life with God. That is the heart and the soul of the gospel, is that you can have life with God. You can do life with God. And we see Jesus making this invitation in this moment, and he says, come, follow me. Now catch this. And I will make you, if you've got a pen, underline that in your Bible. I will make you. Just stop there. And you're allowed to underline in your Bible. If you're, that's no sin there. Think of all the things Jesus could have said in that moment. I will make you. I will make you. Man, he could have said, I will make you the wisest sage around, right? That'd be a good thing. That would have been extraordinary. He could have said, I will make you, I'll make you guys into incredible biblical scholars. He could have done that. Maybe becoming a Christian is about becoming an incredible biblical scholar, knowing the Bible inside and out, memorizing vast portions of it. He could have said that. He could have said, you follow me, and what I'm going to make you into is like an iconic monument of virtuous behavior. You're going to be like, because they're sailors, right? They're fishermen. He could have said, people look at you and go, man, I'm going to make you into the most moral, virtuous. I mean, you're going to be so good. And that would have been a good thing. But that's not what he says. When you look at this passage, you realize there's a lot of things he could have said that when you become a follower of Christ, I will make you into. And of course, Jesus gives these famous words here where he says, I will make you into fishers of men. And you can just picture him, because he spent the morning and he was watching them out there, and he saw the way they could employ all of these skills, the way they had this great knowledge of the fish and the sea and of sailing, and they put all of that together in this great endeavor, right? To supply their villages and other villages with food and sustenance. And here's Jesus, and he says, I get how good you all are at this and how you know it. But here's what I'm going to teach you to do. Not just to fish, but to fish men. I'll make you into fishers of men. And friends, that's the same thing for you and for me. When we become followers of Christ, part of becoming a follower of Christ is that he wants us to become fishers of men. But you have to understand what that means. Part of this goes back to this great vision that Christ has, what that means. There would have been people in Christ's day that were hurting in a variety of ways. There would have been people that were hurting because they were in the religious system of the day. They were Pharisees or grew up in a Pharisaical home, and they got on that religious treadmill, and they worked it and worked it and worked it, and they were tired out. There were people there that were just like, you know what, I can't take this anymore. This religious treadmill that I'm on right now is wearing me out, and I can't do it. And I just quit. There would have been other people that would have been in the midst of that religious treadmill, and they're still banging away at that thing, trying to do that. But the problem with that religious treadmill is you're always one good work away from where you need to be. And wherever you get, it's always a little short of where you need to be. And if you trick yourself into thinking you've arrived there, well, then you just become haughty and arrogant, and nobody likes you, all right? And there would have been people that felt like, I can't live up to that, but I'll pretend. I'll act like I can, When it's my turn to pray, I'll deepen my voice and lengthen the vowels because that sounds really spiritual when you're praying. Or I'll try to put something forward. And there would have been other people that would have said, I quit. I'm not even going to try. I just hope someday when I die, it just kind of all works out. But I can't live up to it. And I'm not going to live some life of hypocrisy, pretending like I'm something I'm not. And there would have been quitters there. There would have been people there that never got the whole God thing in the first place, that just said, I don't even know if there is a God. I don't know how this works. I don't know. And Jesus comes to this world and says, I want to invite people like them into a new kind of life where they can begin to sense the reality of God, where they begin to experience what it is, not to put on a religious show, not to try and live out of our own abilities, but to allow God to begin to transform us into real kinds of people that can live out a new kind of life. He came to give us life, is how Scripture describes it. And man, right? That's so much about what we're trying to be as a church. We want this to be a church where people who don't know anything about God, who just say, there's no way I should walk into a church. If I walked in a church building, the roof would cave in or something. And I've heard that 1,000 times. We want this to be the kind of community where they can come in and say, you know what? I don't know that I get it all yet. I don't know that I believe it yet. I've got a lot of skeptical thoughts on it. But I feel welcome in that place. We want this to be the kind of place where people that maybe have labored or have tried or have said, you know what, I've done this thing and I just gave up. But I still want to taste God. I still want to know, is it possible to live a kind of life-giving life from God? That's what Jesus came, and that's what he invited them to. And so when he says, Simon, Andrew, I didn't just invite you to be my follower so that you could just walk around and watch me do this. I want to make you into the kinds of people, the way I saw you fishing, the way you employed all that you were and brought those fish into the boat. I want you to be a life-giving life-giving kinds of people that actually help spiritually disconnected people, lost people, make it into my kingdom. That's the vision that Christ had for him when he looked them in the eye and said, you follow me and I'll make you into fishers of men. And so the question that I want us to spend our time on, and we're actually going to flip over to Mark chapter 2 here in a moment. You can do that, is that when Jesus fished them, so to speak, into his kingdom and then says, I'll make you into fishers, you realize he's got principles. He's got a method. There are things that he does. And what I want us to look at here a little bit is, how did Jesus fish? What did he employ to do that? Because fishermen have a method. They've got a process that they go through. How many of you are fish at all in here? Okay. How many of you are good fishermen or fisherwomen? Okay. I'm lowering my hand now on that question. You notice that? Okay. I grew up, did a little bit of fishing, and I'm lousy at fishing. Really, really bad at fishing. And I'm going to throw my dad under the bus here. Love my dad, but he's not any better at fishing than I am. In fact, yeah. Is he in this service? I don't know if he's in the service. Okay, well, then I'll really throw him under the bus. yeah. Yeah, that's right. Here. Is that you, Gordy? Sound like Gordy's voice. When I was a boy, I was a really young boy, we went up to the White Mountains for a couple of weeks, and we would camp all the time, and my dad's like, okay, it's time to take my son fishing. We're going to catch a fish and eat it, right? That's what we're going to do. So for like almost 2 weeks, every morning we got up and we went to lakes. We bought licenses and we bought bait and different tackle and different hooks and fishing poles. Nothing until finally, at the end of the trip, he finally takes me to a place called Bill's Lake. You ever been to Bill's Lake? And you know it? Yeah. Let me describe Bill's Lake for you. It's actually a very small pond packed with thousands of very hungry fish is what they do. See, you throw your line in, and not quite, but the fish almost jump out of the water before your hook even gets in the water to bite the hook is what they do. That's where I caught my first fish, and we took it back and we ate our fish. So now, years and years ago, when my son was about that old, right in there somewhere, I decided, and we're on a camping trip, well, it's my turn. I'm the dad now. I'm no good at this. I'm going to take my son fishing. And so we go fishing, and I don't know what I'm doing because I learned from my dad. Love my dad, but that's, all I know. Hip check. So I go to Walmart up in Sholo and buy a pole, and there's like a whole rack full of bait. And I just go, Chandler, pick your favorite color out. I don't know. Just, there's a guy standing there, and I go, so, like, what do I do here? And he goes, well, just use this hook there. Just stick whatever bait your son picks out and just throw it in the lake. And I'm like, okay. So we get out to the lake, buy our license. We get out. It was, I think, Horseshoe Seneca. We get out there. We show up at like noon, which is evidently not the prime time to go fishing. So we get out there, and there's a whole line of fishermen. There must have been more than 20 fishermen on the shore. And I mean, they've got giant tackle boxes. They've got chairs with holders for fishing poles on there. And but you know what I noticed? With all their gear, they've got like fisherman hats and all this stuff. You know what they didn't have? No one had any fish. No one had any fish. Everyone was 0 for 0 that day on fishing. So we show up, and I've got my Walmart bag with all this stuff. I pull it out. I get Chandler's pole out, and I'm putting this stuff on it. While I'm doing that, Chandler, he's all, where are the fish? I don't know. I don't see any fish. And all the other fishermen are looking at us like, oh, man. So then Chandler gets bored with talking, and he starts throwing rocks in the lake, which... Yeah, and then they're really like... So I get his pole. The first thing he does when he gets his pole is he sticks the end of the pole in the water and starts stirring it. Where are the fish? Well, it doesn't really work that way. So finally, we get the thing in there. I'm starting to put bait on my hook. No kidding. It wasn't even 5 minutes. And his pole, and he starts, wow, and he reels in this fish. And all the other fishermen are looking at us like... So I put my pole down, because I don't even have my pole in the water yet. I put more bait of this green goop that was in this jar on the end of his hook. He throws it in there. This time, less than 10 minutes. I barely have my pole in the water. His pole. And I got another one, Dad, look at here. By now, all the fishermen are like, One guy gets up, walks over to us, and he's like, so... what you using for bait there? And I'm like, some stuff at Walmart. That's all I know. And he's looking at me, and I just, I'm like, this is our philosophy. See, we talk a lot, throw rocks in the lake, then stir the lake, then put the green goop on the hook and throw it in. That's just our plan. And I decided I didn't want to gut or cook more than 2 fish, so then we left after 15 minutes. Got our fish. Everyone else is like, yeah, That was our plan. And it seemed like, kind of an irony. But evidently, my son has the spiritual gift of fishing fish. Because every time we go out, he catches fish. It's weird how he catches fish. Now, the way Jesus fished in his day probably seemed a little weird to the people that were around him. Because they had a notion, they had an idea of how all of this worked. And it wasn't the way that they saw Jesus doing it. To them, getting into God's kingdom, being a person of God, was all about sacrifice. It was all about the work that you would do. It was this kind of life that you would do to earn God's love, to garner his love somehow. And so oftentimes the Pharisees, and really the Pharisees, 2 great principles of the Pharisees, the religious leaders of Christ's day, was sacrifice, but it was also separation. In fact, the word Pharisee literally means to separate. And so for them, it was about sacrifice, the work you would do to earn your place in God's kingdom. And then when you got in God's kingdom, while you were living on this earth, you stayed separated. You didn't want to be touched by unclean people, by Gentiles or tax collectors or prostitutes or sinners or all those people out there. And so you stayed away from them. And Jesus comes on the scene, and he kind of turns all of that upside down and says, that's not how we fish here. We don't fish by telling people, when you get your life together, when you become moral and spiritual like me, then you can be someone on the inside like us. And of course, for the Pharisees, they liked the fact that there were lots of outsiders, because for them, the more outsiders they were, the more it raised the value to them of being an insider. But the heart and soul of Jesus was, He loved to see outsiders become insiders because he loved outsiders. And that's why he said to Simon and Andrew, I want you guys to help me with this. I don't want to do this by myself. There's this great excitement, Simon, Andrew, to be fishers of men. I want you to experience what it's like when you build a relationship, when you have one of your friends that's an outsider, that's spiritually disconnected, who's lost, who's been on that religious treadmill and it's worn them out. When you've got a friend who's quit and given up and said, there's no way to know God even if he does exist. When you've got a friend that just says the best I can do is just kind of pretend at this thing. When you have a friend like that and they come to see the real life-giving relationship that is possible with God, then that's a greater thrill than the biggest fish you have ever reeled in your boat. Because what you see in that moment is a real human being that matters and is loved by God. And when they come to begin to experience the life that God has for them, and you get to say, I got to be a part of someone who matters to me, getting to know God in a deeper way. That's exciting. And Jesus wants us to be a part of that. But here's what I want to get back to. I want us to look at some of the ways Jesus fished. And we're going to look at one way in particular here. So look with me back to Mark. So I want you to picture this. Jesus is beginning his ministry. He's calling disciples to him. He calls Simon and Andrew to him, and he says, I want you to be fishers of men. Then one chapter later, we get to see another intersection between Christ and someone else. This guy's name is Levi. His name, later we know it is Matthew. But in this story, as Mark tells it, we know his name was Levi. Levi is a tax collector. And tax collectors live by a totally different set of principles, right? They're not about separation and sacrifice. They're more about collaboration because they collaborated with the Romans. They're going to get all that they can get out of this world. And they were very willing to extort. They extorted their own people and oftentimes became quite wealthy at it. Well, can you imagine how the other Jews felt about them? Imagine how the Pharisees felt about them. The Pharisees were all about being separated, and here are tax collectors collaborating with the Romans, the very people that you should be as separated from as possible. And so the religious leaders looked at the tax collectors and said, you are some of the worst in our society. We have great disdain for you. God must hate you a bunch. God would never want you in our kingdom. So here's Jesus, and now he's going to come to this intersection with Levi. And here's what we pick up. Look with me at verse 13, chapter 2, verse 13. It says this, once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. There he is, our outdoorsman, our surfer. We love Jesus. Out by the lake, a large crowd came to him and began to teach him. So he's out by the lake out there. He begins to teach them. And then kind of after the crowd disperses, it says this, verse 14. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. And there's Levi. And this is an area that this basic area here in Galilee is where Jesus grew up. There's a good chance that Jesus has known Levi for a long time, watched his life. And now Jesus, just as he watched Simon and Andrew kind of from a distance, and then approaches them with this incredible invitation, he's going to do the same thing for Levi. He looks at Levi as none of the Pharisees did. He looks at Levi and he says, man, there is a guy right there who is the Imago Dei. Levi was created in the image of God. Levi has skills and abilities. Levi matters to me. There are things I want to do in Levi's life that will be extraordinary. I want Levi to experience life and life to the full. And so Jesus makes this invitation. Look at it. He says this, just as he did to Simon and Andrew. He said, follow me, Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. And Mark gives us kind of this starkness to the story. He does this in all of the callings of the disciples here. There's kind of this stark, simple, Jesus says, follow me. Followed by kind of just this stark reply of, yes. They drop everything and they follow Christ. And what we don't know here is what motivated Levi for sure. We don't know if Levi was one of those guys grew up in a very Jewish home, very religious. He was obviously Jewish, but we don't know if it was a strong religious background where he grew up and he was on that treadmill and finally said, I can't take it, I quit. We don't know if he grew up in a home where God wasn't a part of it at all. And he just said, I'm going to go out and who cares about this whole God thing? We don't know, but somewhere we know this, that life was hollow. And somewhere in there we know he had a longing to be all that God created him to be. And we know he had a longing to meet God. And in this moment he looks and he says, this guy Jesus is so different. It's worth the risk. And Levi becomes a follower of Christ in this next moment. Now, what happens next, though, is absolutely extraordinary. I love how this story plays out. Levi throws a party. Levi says, I just became a Christian. This is so exciting. I'm going to have Jesus and all of his disciples and followers over to my house. And remember, Levi probably was very wealthy. He didn't have a home that was out in the field someplace. He probably had a very nice home in town that was very prominent. He probably had servants. So when he has them over to dinner, he's not whipping up some ramen. He's got servants that are going to make a nice dinner. They're going to make hors d'oeuvres out on the veranda, okay? This is going to be a nice party. And so he invites Jesus over, and you got to picture this, okay? Here's this moment. And he invites these followers of Christ and these disciples, but he doesn't just invite them. The text tells us, you know who else he invites? His friends, yeah. And who were his friends? Other tax collectors. The kinds of people that did not hang out with rabbis like Jesus, right? And you picture this moment. Every other Pharisee, every other rabbi would have said, if there was someone that was wanting to become a follower of God and they invited me over to their house for dinner the very first time and they invited other tax collectors, that's when we must properly excuse ourselves and leave because we must be separated. But what does Jesus do? He stays. He's having a good time, because there's hors d'oeuvres and there's, and he's going to rub shoulders with other people. And what I love about Matthew in this moment is this just makes perfect sense to him. Why wouldn't Jesus want to hang out with these people? Why wouldn't Jesus want to get to know other people that were like me? Because Levi looks at this thing and what he's seeing is his friends and he's saying, man, they're spiritually disconnected. They need God as much as I do. And I'm going to get them all together. I'm going to throw a little party and we're going to have drinks and hors d'oeuvres and dinner. And you got to picture this party. It's a big party. And it starts because, right, tax collectors knew how to throw parties back then, right? And this party, it spills out into the veranda. It spills out into the front yard. There are probably people hanging out in the street. People in the town would have noticed, especially other Pharisees. And the Pharisees notice this, and they're like, huh? In fact, look at the text. Look with me back at verse 15. When Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were, so it's not just tax collectors, we're pulling in, everyone here in this party. Sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and the tax collectors, they asked the disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Doesn't he understand they're unclean? Doesn't he understand that God can't possibly love them? Doesn't he understand, he'll get the spiritual cooties or something, But here's this great thing we learn about Jesus and how he fishes. And this is the great lesson for us here this morning. Jesus fished first by just being with. Jesus loved to be with spiritually disconnected people. Jesus loved to be with doubters. Jesus loved to be with people who didn't get everything yet. Jesus loved to be with people that were hurting or struggling or that seemed to be far from God. Because he felt those were the people that needed his message and his invitation the most. And so how do we fish? Well, I think we learn from Christ that one of the ways we fish is to be with. That sometimes churches in our day and age, we think there's this thing where we got to get in our holy huddle. We've got to be in these little groups and, no one else is, we got to protect ourselves. And I just want to say that's a mistake. That's a mistake. That's following the way of the Pharisees to be separated. The way of Christ was to be with. In fact, Jesus hears what's going on in this moment, and he gets it. He understands that the Pharisees, they can't get this. In our day and age, that would be like seeing, I don't know, Larry the Cable Guy and Martha Stewart getting together for dinner or something. You'd just be like, didn't see those two getting together, okay? And so he responds, in fact, I want you to look at how Matthew records it. Flip over to Matthew chapter 9 real quick here. Remember, Levi is Matthew. And when Matthew explains this account, he puts in something in the story that Mark leaves out that is so tender, because this was Matthew's party. This was his moment. These were his friends. And Christ says something that you can tell touches Matthew to the core of his soul here. Look at verse 12. On hearing this, what the Pharisees were saying, on hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." The sick. I didn't come to build up a false sense of righteousness. I came because I care about human beings. I care about people. I care about people who aren't getting to taste the life that they were created to live. I care about people who are struggling with sin. I care about people who feel far from God. I care about people who want to know God but don't know how to get there. And then he goes on, and here's the part that he adds that Mark doesn't have. Verse 13, he says this, these are teachers of the law, okay? These are the scholars of the Pharisees, okay? He says, but go and learn what this means. That's kind of a slap in the face is what that is, okay? Because he's saying this to scholars, okay? Go and learn what this means. And he quotes Hosea 6, okay? So he doesn't just say it on his own. He goes, you know that book Hosea that you memorized? Okay, go back and relearn that book. And he quotes it here. He says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And Jesus is saying, and here's what I want us to get about when we fish by being with people that maybe don't always have the same conviction we do. When we're with and build friendships with people that are maybe in a different spot in their religious journey than us, the desire that Christ has is about mercy, not sacrifice. And here's what I want you to get out of this. Mercy carries this sense of authenticity. Mercy means they matter to Christ. They weren't little projects. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I want us to be a church that invites people at various places in their spiritual journey struggling with God. But I never want us to do it as some strange act of a project. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to go build a relationship with this person so I can invite them to church. Because when they become a project like that, what that really becomes in is then it's about me. It's about me, my image, about me acting more spiritual. We want the heart of Christ, a heart of mercy that says, I have friends and neighbors, and they're struggling like I struggled once. They're at places where maybe there's doubts, maybe there's struggles, maybe there's deep desires. What I experienced this morning when we were here worshiping and thinking on those songs, moments where you felt close to God, I want you to say, I experienced something in my community here at this church, and there are people around me, and I would love for them to experience the same thing. I would love for them to have authentic moments of faith, authentic moments where they lay their doubt before God, authentic moments where they feel God changing them, where their morality gets better, not because it's an act of self-righteousness, but because something's changed in their heart. And when you say, I want that for them, then you're fishing the way Christ fished. And that, friends, that's a beautiful thing. That's becoming a fisher of men, the way Christ fished. And so I want to encourage us. It's a good thing when we don't get in holy huddles. It's a good thing when we enjoy and build relationships with people outside this church. Now, I'm going to shift gears here just for a second and talk to one specific group that are maybe here and don't even know that you're here, okay? Throughout the New Testament, there are moments where it talks about people that have a spiritual gift. You know, there's spiritual gift of administration, spiritual gifts of leadership, teaching, lots of different things. One of those spiritual gifts that's spoken of in the New Testament is the spiritual gift of evangelism. And here's what I've learned. Most often, people, like if I were to do a raise of hands of how many people think they have the spiritual gift of evangelism, hardly anybody would raise their hands because we all think of evangelists we've seen in the past and we're like, you know, you got to go back to like Billy Graham before you find someone you go, nice guy, okay? And I want to get that notion out of your head. And I wrote down a couple of things here that, you know the old Jeff Foxworthy joke, you know, you might be a redneck if, okay? I want you to think of that only in a positive way, okay? I'm not calling you a redneck. I'm just saying you might have the gift of evangelism, okay, if you know, like 3 out of 5 of these things are true for you. And I wrote these down because I see this in many of you. And what I want to do is I want to get together with you. I want to have hors d'oeuvres with you or something on, my team's got this worked out. March 9th, I think it's a Friday night. I want to get together with people within this church that have this kind of leaning to this. We should all be fishers of men, but some of you are gifted in unique ways. So let me give you you might be a redneck if only. This is, you might be an evangelist if you naturally build relationships with spiritually disconnected people, if you naturally build relationships with people that are lost, I mean, it happens, you have them, you might have the gift of evangelism. If you're protective of them, okay, and what I mean by that is like if there's some other like Christian that comes along who's ready to thump them over the head with the Bible and tell you're a big sinner and you're going to burn in the fires of hell if you don't, and you're like, get away from my friend, you know, that's not helping them, okay? If you feel protective of some of the spiritually disconnected people in your life because you understand the hurts and the struggles they have and you're protective of them, you might have the spiritual gift of evangelism. If they like you, I really mean this, okay? If like your neighbor says, church, that's for a bunch of jerks, but I like you, you're okay, can't believe you'd go to church, you know? If you find people at work that find out you're a Christian and you know that that's like not their thing and they look at you and go, you know, I do like you. I could see us sitting down for lunch, playing cards, having a good time, go to a movie or something. If they like you, you might have the gift of, and that's not to say that the rest of us are not likable, okay? I'm just to be clear on that. If you find it easy to have spiritual conversations with people that don't believe in the Bible, you might have the gift of evangelism. If when I started preaching this message this morning and started talking about fishing and everything, and you were like, oh, this is my favorite sermon ever, okay? You might, like if you're sitting here burning up because you're like, you loved everything I talked about there, you might have the gift of evangelism. Now, I say all of that because of this, and I really mean this. March 9th, I'd love to get together with you and encourage you and maybe do some things to cultivate some of your natural tendencies in this church. That's something that doesn't happen, and I want to do it in a natural way and in a healthy way. So I will get you more information about that. We'll put it on our Facebook page, maybe the website, and I'll talk about it more next week. But if you have some leanings toward that, I want you to maybe think about joining me on March 9th to talk about that. But for all of us, we're to be fishers of men. We're to be inviters of people that don't know God into something absolutely magnificent, life with God. So why don't you stand and we'll close here. Let me pray. God, I pray that you make us a very authentic kind of church, that we would grow more and more to look at people who don't always get it, people that are far from you, and to love them and to care about them. And to be people that can invite them into a wondrous new life with you. That we want to be a church that on Sunday mornings that they could come and be with us and feel closer to you, God. We want that. And we pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Have a great Sunday. See you next week.